For heaven's sake. It's your children's lives and their future. Not yours, but theirs. Don't let what happened to me and my wife happen to your children.
In fact, there have been some massive disasters around the world following vaccination programs.
Babies are injected with bits of animal, bacterial, viral DNA. They can be incorporated into the human genome. A human DNA structure is changed, or can be changed.
And we are seeing increasing incidence of behavioural abnormalities. We're seeing increasing sociopathic behaviour, increasing crime rates, increasing learning difficulties, attention deficit behaviour. There certainly are some who theorise that that is due to low-grade encephalopathy caused by the vaccine.
Almost 3 years of research before we looked at each other with my late husband and said, vaccines are killing babies.
So it was obvious that I, and every other doctor for that matter, had been grossly misled.
The doctor politely calmed us that it was all right and it was a good thing to do. We did it, we gave him the DPT vaccine and another one as well. We drove from the hospital down about 10 minutes after we'd left the hospital. We were heading home to our farm. And Dylan suddenly started to convulse in my wife's arms in the car. This was just a shock. We were totally lost for that brief moment. We didn't know how or what was going on. Dylan started to turn blue. I just felt so helpless.
Hello, I'm Bronwyn Hancock. For many, an experience like what we just heard from parent Shane Tucker is the first clue that something may be wrong with vaccination. Even then, doctors tell many parents, including him and his wife, that there is no link, so more vaccines are given. Why? Because doctors are taught that damage occurs in only 1 in a million, and far many more lives are saved. Yet despite what they are taught, and many probably believe, many surveys have found that doctors are in fact the least vaccinated in the community. In this look at vaccination, we're going to find out the truth for ourselves. What vaccination does not do, what it does do, why it continues, what our rights are, what can in many cases help counter the effects, and what is the true key to immunity. So to start with, let's have a look to see if vaccination really can be shown to have saved lives. Dr. Isaac Golden is a prominent and experienced homeopath, teacher and author of several books, including one on vaccination. Let's hear what he, along with many others in fact, have found out.
Before I knew what natural medicine was, I used to vaccinate my own children, and one of them, my eldest daughter, was quite severely damaged. And that led me to question whether or not what I was being told by doctors was really accurate, because I was told time and again to go back and keep vaccinating her despite the reactions that she was having. Eventually, the penny dropped and I realised that there was a direct cause between the symptoms that she was experiencing, going from a completely healthy young child to someone who wasn't, and vaccines, because the symptoms were intensifying after each vaccine. That led me to really start looking further than what I was just told by doctors. And where I started was basically with the health departments in England, America and Australia, because my original professional training is in economics and statistics. So I wrote to the governments and got figures. And then I realised when I started plotting the figures on charts that in fact there was a lot of information that we were being told by the orthodox medical profession which wasn't true. And it also made me realise that a great deal of information given to medical students was probably very misleading. Let me give you an example on the overhead. We have here the figures of deaths from whooping cough in America from the time that vaccinations were introduced to around about the late 1980s. These were the figures that I got from the American government themselves. And what they show when you look at those figures is quite clearly, apparently, that the introduction of vaccination caused a great fall in the deaths from whooping cough. However, what I also got were the figures for 40 years before vaccines were introduced. You can actually see where the arrow is, where vaccination was introduced. And so it is quite clear that the majority of the reductions in deaths from whooping cough occurred well before vaccination was even introduced. So the claim in this particular case that vaccination was responsible for eliminating most of the deaths from whooping cough in America is clearly statistically false.
The pattern with whooping cough is, of course, not unique to that disease, as Dr. Vera Scheibner will show us. She is a retired principal research scientist who by now has studied well over 60,000 pages of orthodox medical research articles on the subject, also culminating in a book.
It is a well-documented fact that the incidence and mortality from infectious diseases like measles, whooping cough, rubella, mumps fell by 90% before any vaccine has even been introduced. The mortality from diphtheria between 1900 and 1960, you can see that there was a steady downward trend in mortality from diphtheria long before any treatment has been introduced. And toxoid is vaccine. And you can see that even after the introduction of the treatment and the vaccine, the downward trend simply continued. This is death rate for measles between 1900 and 1960. Again, you can see steady downward trend in mortality from measles without any vaccine. There comes the vaccine here, and it was already at the tail end of mortality from measles. So there must have been other factors than vaccines that caused the observed fall in the mortality from infectious diseases.
Also, as you can see from these graphs, the introduction of the vaccine was not followed by any acceleration in the decline. And, sure enough, an analysis of figures for outbreaks since does not show the vaccinated to be any more protected than the unvaccinated. For example, in an epidemic of whooping cough in Sweden in the late 70s, 84% of the population were vaccinated, and yet the percentage of cases known to be vaccinated was at least 84%. So, as an explanation, vaccinators speak of a principle of herd immunity. Their definition of this term, which is quite different from what it originally meant, is that at least 95% of the population must be vaccinated to prevent an outbreak. But does this work in practice? To find out, we need only look at the United States, where vaccination is compulsory for school entry. Dr. Scheibner will describe a situation which actually occurs very often soon after a vaccination program. In this case, it was in Corpus Christi, Texas, where they had just ensured that 99% were vaccinated, of whom 95% developed antibodies.
An outbreak of measles occurred among adolescents in Corpus Christi, Texas, in the spring of 1985, even though vaccination requirements for school attendance had been thoroughly enforced. And of course, this is not some sort of a rare occurrence. Epidemics in fully vaccinated populations are a rule rather than an exception.
But many doctors say that we must have had great success with the HIB vaccine, because HIB has dropped since it was introduced a few years ago. Well, let's have a look at a breakdown by age relating to its phased introduction in the United States.
This is the incidence of Haemophilus influenza meningitis in children less than 5 years old. This is between 1980 and 1991. Here you have the incidence of bacterial meningitis in children younger than 1 year. These are 1-year-olds, and these are 2 to 4-year-olds. The fluctuations, and particularly the fall in the incidence of meningitis in children younger than 1 year and in 1-year-olds had nothing to do with vaccination, because the vaccine was only introduced here, and meaning the vaccine that was licensed for use in these age groups.
Finally, let's have a look at what happened in Hamburg in Germany without any intensive active prophylaxis.
And this is pertussis whooping cough in Hamburg between 1956 and 70. You can see a steady fall in the incidence of whooping cough. and this is whooping cough with complications, at the time when the rate of live births increased in a substantial way.
So what did cause the decline? Let's hear from Dr. Robin Cosford, a Sydney medical doctor, and Pauline Rose, an independent nurse practitioner.
Scarlet fever, which is an infective disease caused by the streptococcal bacteria, was in existence in the same sort of levels at that same time as whooping cough, measles, polio, these other diseases. And we do not vaccinate against scarlet fever. We never have vaccinated against scarlet fever. And interestingly, the incidence of scarlet fever has dropped off, paralleling the drop in whooping cough and polio and so on. So it would appear, when we actually consider these other factors as well, that it's not the vaccines that have reduced the incidence of these diseases, but other things that were going on in society at the time. There were basic public health measures and sanitation measures, and these seem to be the things that have made the major impact.
And some of the studies that have been done indicating that it wasn't the cure-all that everybody thought it would be, and that in fact there have been some massive disasters around the world following vaccination programs. And that measles, for example, was dying out in Europe, and then they started the vaccination program, and it rose again. And that the thing that had cured measles was in fact the better nutrition programs, a simple general pick-up in the health of the population, increase in vitamin A levels. And the vaccination wasn't solving these problems at all. Just as many people were getting sick post-vaccination as they were before.
So not only does it appear that vaccines do not work, but there is evidence that they are in fact counterproductive. Back to the United States.
This is the incidence of whooping cough, morbidity and mortality from whooping cough, deaths from whooping cough between 1922 and 1987. You can see a steady downward trend in both morbidity and mortality until about 1978. I wrote this down here myself, because after 1978 you can see this very unnatural sharp upswing in the incidence of whooping cough, and mortality remains stationary.
So what happened in 1978?
In 1978, a nationwide childhood immunization initiative was begun. Individual states passed legislation requiring proof of immunization for school entry at 5 and 6 years of age. They mandated vaccination, and it resulted in a threefold increase in the reported incidence of whooping cough. And indeed, children develop whooping cough from the vaccine. And when I say that, of course, vaccinators are up in arms, saying that a child cannot contract whooping cough from the vaccine. But of course, because Bordetella pertussis is dead in the vaccine. But whooping cough is a toxin-mediated disease, meaning it doesn't matter whether Bordetella in the vaccine is live or dead, or whether it is there at all. Because the acellular whooping cough vaccine doesn't contain whole cell Bordetella pertussis. It only contains the protein envelopes. And children can still develop whooping cough from that vaccine.
After 20 years of immunization in 1989, the mortality per 1,000 people in Europe was 10 times less than it was in America. So the Swiss, despite having no immunization policy, had 10 times less mortality from measles than did the United States, which by that state had a 20 years of vaccination experience and had mandated it.
The most interesting thing about this situation in the United States is that the Amish, it's a religious group who reject vaccination on religious grounds. The Amish didn't report a single case of measles between 1970 and 1988. For 18 years, the unvaccinated Amish did not report a single case of measles.
But what about smallpox? Hasn't it been eradicated? Well, vaccination seemed, with this too, to only slow the decline which had already been occurring. Dr. Archie Kalakarinos is a medical doctor and author well known for his success with vitamin C in his work with Aboriginal children.
There was a big epidemic of smallpox in the Philippines, and this was a very important epidemic in many ways because statistics were kept for the first time. And it was clearly demonstrated that the only people who got smallpox twice were the vaccinated, and that there were far more cases of smallpox amongst the vaccinated than amongst the non-vaccinated. And these statistics are available if people want to see them. I think these are the most glaring examples of how people are being misled.
Smallpox outbreaks are, in fact, still occurring in Africa, Asia and India, where there is conflict and poor nutrition. So, how do researchers get figures which appear to show that vaccines have been successful? Well, there are many ways. One is through misleadingly strict definitions of vaccinated. Another is how the disease is diagnosed.
I have always been looking for articles that could demonstrate that vaccines work. And when I saw this title, The Elimination of Indigenous Measles, Mumps and Rubella from Finland by a 12-year 2-dose vaccination program, I said, wow, this is it. This is the article that I've been looking for. So let's have a look how they eliminated indigenous measles, mumps and rubella from Finland. Results. The 99% decrease in the incidence of the three diseases was accompanied by an increasing rate of false positive clinical diagnosis. Another little book. So these children, Finnish children were still developing measles, mumps, rubella, but they called it false positives. What is a false positive?
Polio is a striking example of what you can achieve when you change the diagnostic criteria, as New Zealand medical doctor David Ritchie will reveal.
In 1954, the Americans pushed forward a polio campaign with the oral Sagan polio vaccine. What happened within the first year was, to their horror, they found that particularly one type of the polio vaccine was causing polio. Because what, of course, the vaccine is not a totally killed virus. You're giving polio in a partly killed form, so-called attenuated form. And so they jumped up and down and got rid of this particular type of polio vaccine. That was fine. Then they realized, to their horror, this is written up, this is actually reported by Dr. Ratner, who was a public health official in Chicago at the time. The next thing was, they realized that in fact all the different types of oral polio vaccine would cause polio. That also was a bit of a shock. And so they simply ignored that data. That data has never been released really that publicly. You'll find it very hard to find that in the published literature. What they did though was they decided to redefine polio. Prior to that, polio was, by definition, if you had muscle weakness in one limb, one or more limbs, within 2 examinations, 24, 48 hours apart, it was called polio. What they did, the first thing they did was say, okay, polio can only diagnose as polio if the person has still got paralysis 60 days later after the actual event. Now, in most cases of polio, of course, the paralysis resolves within the first few days. Very few go on to get permanent paralysis, although, of course, that's the form we see most dramatically. That's more than, I think that cut the amount of polio in the Western world by about 80%, just by changing definition, not by vaccination. They then went a bit further and said, look, there's all sorts of other viruses that can cause a polio-like syndrome. We better make sure they're not included. So they changed the definition again, and they said, okay, polio is now only diagnosable if you can grow the polio virus from the feces and you haven't been immunised in the last month, because of course we excrete the polio virus after immunisation. So by these two rather interesting changes of definition, the rate of polio, the incidence of polio, dropped dramatically in the 1960s.
And now I will show you how they eliminated poliomyelitis in the Americas, meaning South America. In these countries, there are less than 100 reported cases of polio per year. They started vaccinating in 1985. Within 4 months, they had an outbreak of 350 cases. Indeed, these shadowy columns here are reported, notified cases of flaccid paralysis. And these black columns represent confirmed cases. They couldn't do very much about it here or here, but they started fiddling with the figures. So they caused a sustained, huge outbreak of poliomyelitis, but they started discarding most of the cases. That's the word they used in the paper, discarding. But I praise them for publishing it this way.
But what about Australia? Aren't outbreaks occurring due to low vaccination levels? Well, Dr. Mark Donoghue, a Sydney medical doctor, can put us in the picture here.
I also want to say something about where this figure of 51%, we have lower vaccination rates than third world countries. We have a minister who has stood up and said, I intend to get 90% vaccination rates by the time I leave here. You've got to think about this ABS study, the Australian Bureau of Statistics study, right through the paper, says what all the shortcomings are. There are certain states in which it was able to check its information. It found it overestimated the unvaccinated group by a factor of 50%. There were, in fact, when you look at recall, ask the parents, did you vaccinate? Half of the people who said no had actually vaccinated. They just didn't know it. They'd forgotten it. There was some missing information. The Australian Bureau of Statistics does not suggest 51% vaccination rates. It says it's around 51% for a child having got all vaccines from age 1 to 6 all on time. What's the major reason that people didn't get it? It was the Haemophilus influenza B that the doctors didn't even know they should be giving it. 51% is just not true. If you look at the vaccination for the majority of those diseases, you're finding figures between 75 and 90%, exactly the same as have been done in other studies. Why aren't the real figures used? Because it does not suit government to say there isn't a problem. In the push to keep on going and keep on going, figures are drawn out of mid-air. The trouble is we're reporting it with only a clinical impression. Most of these cases now are not confirmed by laboratories, not confirmed by cultures. We don't know much about where the cases are coming from. It is just a number appearing out of the blue. It's expected not because there's been an increase in pertussis, but because we had a media event and pressure on doctors from every corner. And I know this because I get the doctors' journals and papers on every corner to push vaccination, to push it, not let a child go, never waste an opportunity in your surgery, never let people think that the adverse reactions may outweigh the benefits. Now, after 6 months of that, the success of it can be measured that doctors are not reporting the adverse reactions, but are now reporting the cases of those that are missed. And that we also have strange things with this. The cases that are being reported are in fact in states where they have the highest vaccination rates.
But vaccination seems to sound great in theory, and we know that about 80 to 95% of the time it induces the production of antibodies. So why is it not working?
What is going to alter our whole concept of vaccines and immunity is the epidemic of AIDS. We were taught that antibodies meant protection against the disease. We were taught that a person was immunised or vaccinated, they developed antibodies and protected them against the disease. In actual fact, this was never really true. Certainly, it so happens in most cases that antibodies go with a measure of protection. They don't mean protection, it just happens to go along with the protection. In the same way that most cars happen to have 4 wheels. But you can, of course, have cars with only 3 wheels, or cars with 6 wheels. They're still cars. When the AIDS epidemic started, it was clearly shown that the antibodies, instead of meaning protection, meant that you were doomed. So suddenly people had to change the whole concept and say, well, yes, antibodies really don't mean protection after all. Now you can have, even with simple diseases like measles and rubella and a whole lot of other diseases like that, you can be loaded with antibodies and still get the disease and still even die from the disease. You may have no antibodies and not catch the disease. So this concept of antibodies that we were taught as students is wrong, and many other things are wrong, and I believe that it's going to be the AIDS epidemic which is forcing doctors to look at infectious diseases in a different way, and eventually will demonstrate quite clearly that our use of vaccines is not based on good science.
So, what do antibodies actually mean? Well, they simply show that the body has been exposed to the germ, that's all. Now normally, a virus comes in through the mouth, the nose, the tonsils, the skin or the mucous membranes. These outer layers of defence are now being recognised as very important for the protection of our vital organs within. But not only that, they are also in fact crucial in the process of developing immunity to that germ. By injecting vaccines, we're of course, ironically, bypassing these crucial processes. So, we are preventing immunity from being even achievable, plus actually increasing the risk of harm. And it is not only the relevant germ that's injected. So what else goes in with it? Well, to start with, some very toxic substances, such as formaldehyde, mercury and aluminium.
Went into the Poisons Information Centre to ask them if formaldehyde was safe, because I found out that formaldehyde was in the vaccines. I asked them, was there any safe amount? They said no, under no circumstances was any formaldehyde to be administered in a child's body. This is one of the ingredients in the DPT vaccine. I then rang up the Commonwealth Serums laboratories in Canberra. I spoke to a doctor there to find out what formaldehyde was doing in the vaccine. He said not to worry, it only comes from squashed up ants. Nothing to be alarmed about. One says this, the other says this. I can't make sense of it. And I still wonder, what is formaldehyde doing in a vaccine?
We're also getting a lot of problems with toxicity. And I find a lot of people that have risks perhaps with aluminium and some of the mercury problems, that they may be connected in mercury with the fillings, but you may get in patients who've had no fillings and not much history of high fish contamination, where the other problems with mercury come from. And you have to suspect the fixatives that go into making vaccinations. There are a lot of toxic material goes in there.
Some of the ingredients, like formalin, which is a known carcinogen, thiomersol, which is a mercury derivative, aluminium phosphate, and we know that aluminium has been linked to Alzheimer's disease. These chemicals are routine parts of vaccines.
That was Dr. Peter Baratossi, an Adelaide medical doctor. It's worth adding that in each dose, each of these chemicals can be at levels of up to 0.025%. So, what else is in vaccines? Well, vaccines are cultured in cells from animal organs, which can be contaminated with unlimited, unknown animal viruses. They can only test for the very few that have already been identified. The monkey virus SV40 contaminated polio vaccines, which were given to millions of children in the 50s and 60s, and has been found to cause brain tumours, often many years later. There is also strong evidence of contamination by another certain monkey virus, SIV, a close relative of HIV. Let's hear from Dr. Mark Donoghue and dog breeder Ashley Alton, concerned about this contamination issue.
You can now convert a virus which used to exist in a monkey line or a different line, didn't kill them. If you convert it even slightly through the processing of a vaccine, then you can introduce it into an unrelated species, namely humans.
The parvovirus itself, which is one of the main problems in dogs at the moment, did not exist until the late 1970s, when it appeared almost simultaneously worldwide. There were two theories put forward by the researchers and vets regarding the sudden appearance of this new disease, both of which were related to vaccines.
I remember Mendelssohn saying that it may be that you only get one chance to make one big mistake in vaccination because of the numbers of people vaccinated. If you introduce a pathogen, you now have it introduced in tens or hundreds of millions of people simultaneously in a route that the body does not have protection against.
But it's not just the viruses that can cause trouble. Foreign animal protein and genetic material are also being directly injected. This material can come from monkey and dog kidney, rabbit brain, cow, pig and chicken egg. The human body has never encountered this before in its entire history.
Now when we eat protein, it goes into the gut and it is broken down into its constituent amino acids, so that what is absorbed into the body is not a foreign animal protein at all, but is the constituent amino acids that our body then builds back up into our own protein. If for some reason a foreign animal protein makes it into our bloodstream without having been broken down into its constituents, this can set up again an autoimmune type response. So again, by injecting directly into the bloodstream things that were never meant to be directly in the bloodstream, we are not only bypassing body defences, but we are wrongly activating other body defences.
Babies are injected with bits of animal, bacterial, viral DNA. They can be incorporated into the human genome. A human DNA structure is changed, or can be changed. So theoretically, humans are changed. The DNA structure is added, extra genes are added. What will we turn into?
Let's look at just some of the results of putting all these substances into the body, usually by injection, and much of it even in uncontrolled amounts.
From the moment he was vaccinated, he was a very sick baby, and it took 4 months for the disease to kill him. He was the first baby to ever have a biopsy of the kidneys. It was sent worldwide, and 6 specialists from overseas agreed that his condition was definitely due to the vaccine because of the fact that he had been born with perfectly formed kidneys.
I found, particularly in Aboriginal children, but also Caucasian children, if they had even a simple cold, or if they'd gone through a series of simple illnesses recently, or if their nutritional status was not really as good as it should have been, if they were vaccinated, the result could be fatal. I went to Melbourne to give some lectures about this problem, and I was away, I think, for 5 or 6 days. A doctor came to relieve me. I carefully explained to him that under no circumstances should he vaccinate sick Aboriginal infants, even if they had a simple cold. Now, when I left town, I won't use his exact words because they were rude, he actually said to some of the citizens in the town that he did not believe in my theories, mind you, he said, not my observations, and he had no intention of carrying out my methods of practice. He saw one Aboriginal little boy, the best cared for infant in the district, white or black. And this boy had an upper respiratory tract infection. He gave triple antigen. The child died. He saw a second Aboriginal infant, a little girl, who had mild diarrhea. And he obviously thought, well, that first case was just a coincidence, had nothing to do with the vaccine. He gave triple antigen. I came back to Colorado, and I found that little girl dying in the bed.
And Cotes researchers at that time thought that these babies were dying because there was something wrong with their breathing controls. So they concentrated on breathing. And some parents opted for monitoring their babies' breathing at home in an attempt to prevent their children dying from Cotes. The alarms happened after a host of stressful events, like incubating an illness. A night or two before the runny nose appeared, babies had a cluster or two of alarms. So the alarms preceded the onset of symptoms. Overtiring day, long shopping trips, and car trips and things like that. But the vast majority of alarms happened after vaccination. That was at the time that we didn't know anything about the controversy surrounding vaccination. Indeed, some 40 years ago, I had my children vaccinated. And with the first child, we didn't even link that stream of ear infections, recurrent ear infections, bronchitis, and generally chronic ill health to the administration of those vaccines. I don't even know what vaccines she was given. It really took research into babies' breathing. Almost 3 years of research before we looked at each other with my late husband and said, vaccines are killing babies. Indeed, it is the clustering of death and clustering of flare-ups of stress breathing that constitutes a truly scientific evidence of the causal link. But of course, when you study these papers dealing, for instance, with Tennessee deaths or other deaths after vaccination, they say that there was an unusual clustering of these deaths, but it does not constitute evidence of the causal link. And yet, all their data are showing the same clustering. These are the so-called Tennessee deaths. Between 1977 and 79, large numbers of babies died so many days after their first triple antigen injections. And here you have got 41 babies who died within 20 days. And the interesting thing is that you see clear clustering of these deaths along the same critical days as we recorded in breathing of babies after vaccination. It stands to reason that babies would die more often, or more babies would die on those critical days when any baby has a flare-up of stress breathing. And again, here you see a truly scientific evidence of the causal link between administration of those DPT injections and the Tennessee deaths. Here you are looking at a record of breathing of 9 babies. Every color represents one child. And this is day 0. You can see a number of days before vaccination, no stress level in breathing. There comes the injection, and you can see the 48-hour flare-up. You can see the flare-ups in between. And look at the delayed reaction. All of those babies had a delayed reaction. And even those babies whose mothers recorded no response at all, here down the bottom, even those babies had slightly increased stress level along the same days as those babies who reacted quite a lot.
In 1975, when Japan ceased vaccinating under 2 years of age, it immediately jumped from 17th place to the lowest infant mortality in the world. 13 years later, it lowered the minimum vaccination age to 3 months, and the trend then immediately reversed.
He'd stopped breathing. The doctors then grabbed my son Dylan, took him away, and about 5 minutes later came out and said it was nothing but a heat stroke. Everything was fine. They just observed him for a couple of hours, and then they assured us it was all right to take him home.
And yet, when we look at the symptoms that we see in a child who has been vaccinated, high fever, high-pitched screaming, floppiness, sometimes even a weakness and almost a hemiplegic situation in some cases. These are symptoms that if they were seen in a child who had not just been vaccinated, all us doctors would be a little concerned that this child perhaps had a type of viral meningitis. We wouldn't simply sit back and say that's fine, take some Panadol and it will go away.
We'd totally forgotten about what had happened the first time. We didn't even relate it to ourselves. The doctor administered the shot, we left the hospital, we got into our car. The moment we sat in our car, Dylan started convulsing. This time it was just rapid convulsions. He was just jumping in our arms, literally jumping. His eyes rolled back in his head, he stopped breathing, his lips went blue, and he went limp. He just went limp. We raced up to the hospital and we said, look, what is happening to our child? This is twice now. Each time he's had an injection, he has had a severe effect. The doctors said, come with us. They took us with us. At the end of 24 hours, they finally told us that Dylan had meningitis and it was nothing to do with the vaccine that was administered to him moments before his apparent convulsions. That was the scariest moment of my life as a parent.
We don't know enough about how stresses affect the body. It's interesting with the first MMR vaccine that came out in New Zealand, and I think definitely also Australia, we had the so-called Arave strain of mumps in it. Now the Japanese did lumbar punctures, and they proved that this particular mumps vaccine caused meningitis in a significant number of I think 1 in 600 recipients of the vaccine a month later. You try to go to your GP and tell them that what's happening to your child now is due to vaccine month 30, he'll laugh at you.
You often hear, of course, that when a child develops encephalomyelitis, brain damage, or dies after vaccination, that was coincidental, it was not caused by the vaccine. And there is no evidence of the causal link. Well, that's not true. 1985, Japanese Journal of Medical Science and Biology published this article. And they say here that administration of pertussis vaccine causes a variety of untoward reactions in children. The most distressing reactions are encephalopathy and neurological disturbances, which have occasionally been observed and in rare cases produce severe brain damage and even death. Such unfortunate incidents have frequently lowered the acceptance rate of the vaccines and have even brought on vaccination boycotts. Well, you often hear that actually we have to prevent children from getting measles because we want to prevent this degenerative disease of the brain, which is often linked to measles virus, subacute sclerosing panencephalitis. However, this article says that actually children who never had history of natural measles but were given measles vaccine also developed SSPE. So, vaccination is not preventing SSPE. This is another article which says the same thing. This is published in JAMA, Journal of American Medical Association, panencephalitis following measles vaccination. Again, a child with no history of natural disease but had a history of measles vaccination and developed SSPE. And it stands to reason that if there is a side effect which can be caused by the natural disease, then it must also be caused by the vaccine.
Very interesting work done back in the 1930s, 1940s, where they recognised that forms of encephalitis could in fact leave behavioural difficulties. This work has been long buried, but it calls into question, now that we are mass vaccinating huge numbers of children, and we are seeing increasing incidence of behavioural abnormalities, we're seeing increasing sociopathic behaviour, increasing crime rates, increasing learning difficulties, attention deficit behaviour. There certainly are some who theorise that that is due to low-grade encephalopathy caused by the vaccine.
Immunisations can cause an encephalitis, an inflammation of the brain. In fact, if you extend the description far enough, any form of irritability is a mild form of encephalitis and can be related to things like ADD, the attention deficit disorder, autism, minimal brain damage. Just think, thousands, millions of children are immunised. A percentage of them get brain damage, autism. Why is it that only since the 40s have autism, brain damage come about? Because this is when immunisation was introduced to a large extent.
Of course, any part of the body, not just the brain, can be damaged. And what are we doing to our immune system?
It's interesting to see that there have been increased incidences of polio following mass vaccination, not necessarily against polio, but against other diseases. Now, perhaps this is because by vaccinating as we are doing, we are imbalancing the immune system, and so the body's natural defence against polio at that point is reduced.
Those outbreaks of polio, 1930s, 1949-50, were demonstrably caused by intensified diphtheria vaccination. Because parents of the children who developed polio complained that it happened within days, weeks, or 3 months of diphtheria injections. Provocation, poliomyelitis. So that is the truth about those outbreaks of polio. And I offer a well-considered personal opinion that polio is a man-made disease.
Soon after they began vaccinating against measles, a new vicious form appeared, only in the vaccinated. In this atypical measles, instead of the rash moving downwards and outwards away from the vital organs, as per normal, it heads straight for them, resulting in pneumonia or meningitis that resists all treatment. Research in Canada found that atypical measles occurs in up to 50% of measles cases in the vaccinated and only in the vaccinated, with an estimated mortality rate of 12 to 15%. So next time you're told how many have died from measles, mumps or whooping cough, etc., ask how many were in fact vaccinated for that disease or for any other disease. Now, not only do vaccines increase susceptibility to various diseases, but they also cause chronic immune malfunction. Leanne Hawkins, founder of a vaccination information group, had an experience with her children, which is quite common.
When she was born, she was a very healthy little child, and she was fine until she received her first vaccination. Although I didn't realise it at the time, is when the problem started. She had broke out in eczema and she was developing asthma, and she had a whole range of allergies. We spent a lot of time going to many specialists who ended up asking me when she was vaccinated, and I'd say 2 to 3 weeks ago by the time they got to see her, and they would say, oh, it's purely coincidental, and they would refer me to somebody else to try and help her with the problems that she was having at the time. The second time was with my little boy, and there's 15 years difference between my firstborn and my second, and I picked it up almost immediately after the first vaccination and asked the doctor, and he said no, it was purely coincidental. My little boy broke out in eczema at that time and he was unwell for a week, but then after his second vaccination, within 3 hours he became very sick, and all the problems that my first daughter had suffered with, my little boy was now suffering with.
I have also a number of people who've sought advice from me where the child has had clear adverse reactions to the first shot, and the doctor's advice on the second shot is, oh, it's going to happen again. Now, we know from adverse reactions that these things are likely to escalate. Now, about 20 years ago, more than 6 courses of antibiotics, 6 illnesses in a year was cause for concern and maybe referral for investigation as to why a child would be so sick. For the last number of years, 12 infections a year has been the magic number, that if a child gets sick more than 12 times a year, then they need referral to somebody who can make some sense about what's going on for this child. In this last year, the proposal was put forward that it should now be 24, that a child should be considered quite normal having 2 infections a month through their early years of life. Now here's my concern, is we may have lost the plot here. We now have a sicker group of children. They may not have polio, they may not have whooping cough, they may not have diphtheria, but we have a really crook group in the community. We have a health minister saying we have one of the best health systems in the world. Why? Because the average 2-year-old child sees a doctor 7 to 8 times a year. Now, the best health system in the world would be one where the average child sees a doctor not at all a year. You don't measure your health system by how frequently people are seen, but by how infrequently people are seen.
This is probably one of the most common effects of immunisations that I see in my surgery every day. Children with recurrent ear infections, tonsillitis, they catch every virus or cold that comes around. That is because their immune system has been suppressed. And most of the time, parents can relate that back to one or other of their immunisations. That's when they got their first cold, or ear infection, or tonsillitis, and ever since they've been getting infection after infection after infection.
Because again the body has been exposed to this by a false route, there is a possibility that what we're looking at here is a continued low-grade exposure to that antigen, and antigen is the word we use here. And when we have that, T cells get continuously low-grade, switched on, if you like, and continuous low-grade release of these things called cytokines. Now this is an interesting thing because there are certain modern diseases which appear to have this pattern. And there certainly are quite a few researchers who would think that, for example, chronic fatigue syndrome may be correlated with this, because in a significant number of chronic fatigue syndrome patients you find abnormally low-grade switched-on T cells. And it's interesting that the age incidence of chronic fatigue syndrome correlates.
Following this episode with the tetanus toxoid vaccine, there's the whole time since then, my life has been totally changed because I've suffered from like a chronic fatigue syndrome. This was immediately after this time that I had the vaccine.
Chronic fatigue syndrome, suffered by Ron Lyons, as we just heard, is just one of many immune diseases that vaccines are well documented to cause. Other such immune diseases include arthritis, diabetes, cancer, leukemia and multiple sclerosis. Now, let's have a look at a product insert, in this case for the hepatitis B vaccine. It can be quite surprising what you can find just on these if you read the small print. It lists various problems which are caused by the vaccine. For example, arthritis, neuropathy, paresthesia, paralysis, neuritis, Guillain-Barré syndrome, optic neuritis, multiple sclerosis, delayed hypersensitivity reactions appearing up to several weeks after vaccination, manifesting as arthritis and various dermatological reactions. This vaccine, which has only recently become standard for newborns, can also cause a paroxysmal cough very similar to whooping cough. We must wonder then how many whooping cough cases really are whooping cough. Vaccines have also been documented to lead to vascular injuries. These include the very types of injuries that have been the basis for carers being accused of harming, sometimes killing, babies, apparently by shaking them. So how often do vaccines cause serious problems? Well, here are a few sample frequencies. For every 6,000 children born in Australia, 18 die of asthma, 3 have autism with significant intellectual disability, 12 have cerebral palsy diagnosed after 6 months of age, which is 75% of all cases, and 300 to 600 are diagnosed with ADD or ADHD. These are just a few of many conditions which are not only linked to vaccination, but were unknown before vaccination started to any significant extent 100 years ago. Other examples are cancer under the age of 40, and also illness from polio and from HIV meningitis. Both of these organisms are normally totally harmless, and their propagation by various vaccines is well documented. It is also worth noting that according to an article in Neurology 1987, the occurrence of convulsions per dose of whooping cough vaccine is 1 in 1,750, and up to 5 doses are given. Most effects of vaccines are delayed, and as a result, the link goes unrecognised. But the link with a surprising number are, in fact, well documented. Greg Beattie, parent and now author of a book on the subject, summarises many effects of vaccines that are hidden from public knowledge.
They don't tell us little things like if your child misses the whooping cough vaccine, they'll be less likely to develop asthma. They don't tell us that children who miss the measles vaccine are less likely to develop inflammatory bowel diseases. And they don't tell us that children who miss the Hep B vaccine or the HIV vaccine are less likely to develop diabetes. Or those who miss the rubella vaccine are less likely to develop arthritis. And they don't tell us the big things even, like vaccines cause brain damage, cause permanent paralysis, severe blood disorders, chronic nervous system dysfunction, death. As these are very important things, and we should be told. They're the results of proper scientific research, and they're all published in their own professional journals. We should be told.
Another documented effect of vaccination is to turn whooping cough, measles, mumps, rubella and chickenpox, which are called childhood diseases and normally beneficial at that age, into dangerous diseases of infants. Let's compare countries that do and do not vaccinate against whooping cough, for example.
Sweden discontinued whooping cough vaccination in 1979. That was after the 1978-79 epidemic of whooping cough. By the way, these epidemics occur worldwide at the same time, all over the world, irrespective of whether the country vaccinates or not. So in 1978-79, 84% of Swedish children who developed whooping cough were fully vaccinated. So the government read the statistics correctly, and they discontinued whooping cough vaccination. A 10-year follow-up of the age distribution of whooping cough demonstrated that there was no incidence below the age of 6 months, and the majority of cases, something like 90%, occurred between about 2.5 and 10 years of age. At that age, whooping cough is not a dangerous disease. Whooping cough is only a potentially unpleasant disease in babies below the age of 6 months. And now let's have a look at the age distribution of whooping cough in the United States with their mandatory vaccination. This is from Journal of Infectious Diseases 1994, age-specific incidence of bacteriologically confirmed pertussis, Massachusetts 1981-91. 90% of cases of whooping cough in the United States occur below the age of 1 year. And this is a breakdown in months, which is even more interesting, because you can see a very high incidence of whooping cough below the age of 2 months, which includes, of course, the 6-week-old babies. In the United States, they start vaccinating at 6 weeks. But nevertheless, you can see a high incidence of whooping cough below the vaccination age. In this article, they explain it this way. These babies were born to mothers who were vaccinated in childhood, and the vaccinated mothers had very poor or no transplacentally transmitted immunity, which normally protects small babies from contracting whooping cough or any other infectious diseases. So this is evidence of the long-term insidious side effect of vaccination, damaging transplacentally transmitted immunity.
So we also need to consider what we are doing to our children's children through weakening passed on immunity. But more than that, are we harming our genes or our reproductive organs?
Because of the increase of asthma today, has it come because we've got the parents vaccinated? And although children don't inherit the same allergy as their parents do, they do inherit a tendency to have an allergy from parents. And we know that there is some connection between mitochondrial damage and DNA now that could be passed on.
Breeders recently have been experiencing shocking infertility problems in a lot of their dogs, males and females, low sperm counts. The females just not conceiving when the dogs are proven stud dogs. And they've been finding that even once they stop vaccinating, we're still getting residue results through infertility and or the arthritic conditions that have also been linked to the vaccinations in dogs. There is actually a wide number of conditions that have been linked to the vaccinations in dogs. But the difference between humans and dogs is that dogs actually have 1/10 of the length of a generation that a human does. So what we're seeing in dogs today is what we'll see in the future with humans. And that's a really frightening thing. If they don't start listening and looking at the true data on what's happening in our dogs, then in 5 generations' time, or a lot less, you will see the same thing occurring in humans.
To summarise in broad terms, instead of resulting in prophylaxis, meaning prevention, all responses to vaccines actually fall under the broad umbrella of anaphylaxis, which means sensitisation, the opposite of immunisation. Most effects, from local swelling at the injection site to chronic problems like allergies and asthma, right through to paralysis, brain damage and death, are simply reflecting the various degrees of anaphylaxis, with consequences even transcending generations. The next question is, are childhood diseases even dangerous if they occur at the right age, that is, to unvaccinated children?
In fact, in most cases they're not. Children's illnesses are there for children to catch. That in effect builds up their immune system, strengthens it. The orthodoxy always bring up the death rate of measles in third world countries. Sure, thousands of children die of measles in third world countries, but that's not because they don't get the measles vaccine. That's because of malnourishment, poor living conditions, poor water supplies, no sewerage. In Western countries, children very rarely die of any of the childhood illnesses. And those that do die usually have some other coexisting problem.
We see children with diphtheria antibodies, with pertussis antibodies, who've never had the illness. How did this happen? Well, it's because it went in through the top end, a type of vaccination has occurred, the immune system's grabbed these pertussis or the diphtheria, has recognised it, and then said, oh, here's the answer, and now the body's protected.
Looking at these diseases in their natural history and their natural pattern, they are not significant diseases. Mumps is typically a benign disease of childhood. When occurring in young children, other than causing some glandular swelling or discomfort, it passes with generally no long-term consequences. However, mumps in a teenager has a high rate of causing testicular inflammation and other problems. It is not the same disease as when it occurs in childhood. Similarly, rubella in young children is a very benign, self-limited disease. Measles, yes, certainly measles can cause complications in childhood, but there are good studies now that show that measles is basically a vitamin A deficient disease. It occurs in a much higher rate with people with an underlying subclinical vitamin A deficiency, and indeed the World Health Organization are using significant doses of vitamin A being given to people in the undeveloped countries to help prevent measles. So the whole question of the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine causing side effects when it is being used to vaccinate against diseases that perhaps shouldn't even consider being vaccinated against.
Children in a natural environment with adequate education, adequate wealth, adequate access to medical resources should they become sick, then all of the vaccine preventable diseases, with the exception of polio, are eminently treatable illnesses. Even measles and mumps, although they're viruses, these do not need to be severe illnesses for the vast majority of children. For sick children, people who are already sick, yes, you can get adverse consequences. But nothing like the rate that we put up with risks in other areas of our lives. These are very, very minor risks compared to the risks that we put up with, even possibly with vaccination.
This is a very interesting article. Lancet, 1985. Measles virus infection without rash in childhood is related to disease in adult life. The benefits of measles. What it means is that having measles not only gives lifelong immunity, specific immunity to measles, but also non-specific immunity to certain tumors, immunoreactive diseases, degenerative diseases of bone and cartilage, and sebaceous skin diseases. Why would anybody want to rob children of this benefit? And on top of that, measles also represents developmental milestone, because people, you notice that after recovering from measles, children have got a growth sort of spurt. And this is an article published in Cancer, 1966. Already in 1966, they knew that having mumps protects against ovarian cancer.
Now, my daughter got measles at the age of about 6 or 7, which is fairly normal. And she drew a series of pictures. Now, we have a lot of interest in childhood drawings. Here is a little person here, trapped inside this red hot house, which of course is her body, with a high fever. And she wasn't very happy at that stage. And then she went through another phase, and the sun started coming out a little bit. And she drew this sort of picture. We see the house is still red, but the flowers are out. Things are getting better. And then suddenly she drew this picture, which intrigued us. And it was a very dreamy child, these lovely dreamy children. But suddenly she drew a picture at the end of her measles illness, which showed an amazing amount of detail. As you see, there's tiles on the roof, there's a clothesline, there's paintings on the fence, there's birds, there's lots of detail. And we had the very strong feeling that this illness had actually helped wake her up to the world. And I give a lot of talks to parents, and I always ask this question: do you see your child making any developmental steps through the illness they've gone through, especially in illness with a fever and a rash? And I think many people who've got away from the antibiotic suppressing type philosophy with antibiotic paracetamol are actually now acknowledging this, that we actually see children going through a growth spurt in terms of development. Maybe they start speaking better, maybe they show new signs of development. I could talk for half now, I don't want to because I don't have the time, but it's just interesting. If you look at illness in a different way, maybe these illnesses actually have a role in childhood, and maybe supporting your child through the illness is actually much better for the immune system, the child's whole development, than using fairly toxic substances to try and prevent it, which maybe you can't do anyway.
So asking Asking whether childhood diseases are dangerous could be likened to asking whether exercise is dangerous. Of course, all this leads to an obvious question, which is, why does vaccination continue?
When we have a belief that prevents us from taking a rational look at things, that prevents us from accepting reality, they say we're in a trance. When whole nations or communities experience that, it's called a cultural trance. An example of that was when everyone thought the world was flat. I believe we're in a cultural trance over vaccination ever since 200 years ago when Jenner performed his experiment, which I might add was on one person. Ever since that time, vaccination has been heralded as a great discovery, and in fact it's become one of the foundation stones of modern medicine. And to question it is heresy. Vaccination is considered to be so great and so wonderful, it's been promoted for the entire 200 years as a safe and effective procedure. Governments can hardly go back on that now. So how do people go about preventing the information from reaching people? That's a very complex question, but I believe it's mainly ignorance. Most health experts just don't know all of this information. In fact, they know very little of it because they very rarely read their own professional journals. Most of them are so busy, and there's so many professional journals around.
People don't like to accept responsibility for their own health. So it's easy to allow the doctors to do something to them to keep their health. Secondly, immunisation information comes mainly from the drug companies and from the researchers that they pay. So all the information comes from the source. There are very few real independent researchers. And thirdly, vaccines are $1 billion industry, and there are at least 1 billion good reasons there why it's continued.
They say openly in the legal system basically says you would rise against vaccination. AMA would push to deregister.
There is now 40% of Australians who seek their primary health care through alternative medicine practitioners. Total cost is $1 billion. The other 60% seek their health care through orthodox medical practitioners. Total cost $22 billion. It's one of those social things which, why are so many people choosing to leave doctors? Quite likely because doctors no longer have the trust of the community. A doctor who's prepared to lie to achieve a good result from vaccination, that is, get more children vaccinated, has got to be prepared that the people who they've lied to may choose not to go back to them. And that is a problem for me, that I am a part of a profession that is systematically lying to people about a potentially risky procedure. I don't see that that's in any way able to be answered by it, but it's for the good of the community.
Lying for the good of the community? Worse than that, the law is actually being broken. In 1992, the High Court of Australia ruled that doctors have a legal duty of care to warn of all side effects of a material nature of all procedures from the perspective of the patient, and even if the patient does not ask. Further, not only are we not being told about already existing research results, but there is great resistance to even the discovery of new, particularly undesirable results.
We've got John Martin in America, who has studied the stealth virus. And the stealth virus is an altered cytomegalovirus. Where did he find it? In vaccines. Now he's relating that to human illness called cytopathic non-pathogenic. The virus has been altered in a way which does not allow the immune system to eliminate it, but where it can still damage cells. Talked here a couple of years ago. When he related this back to a vaccination, he lost his tenure at the University of Southern California. He is then excluded from the process of academics, not because his research was good or bad. He is a meticulous, careful, well-respected and well-published researcher. But when he touched this issue, he became a persona non grata.
Now, we must remember that vaccination can have various uses, but is our health one of them?
And President Ford was going to vaccinate the entire population of America, every man, woman and child, black, white and brindle, against a particular type of flu called swine flu, because he'd been advised that there was going to be a huge epidemic that would kill thousands of people. Now I spoke out against it. The newspapers got hold of it, and eventually I appeared on Kathy Crosby's television program, and I specifically said that many people would drop dead after receiving the vaccines, particularly if they had a heart problem or a potential heart problem. Now there was someone in New York watching the program who didn't like a gentleman called Gambino. Gambino is about 70 years old, the mafia boss. He thought, now this is a great idea. So he got someone to persuade Gambino to have his flu shot, and Gambino promptly dropped dead. And the newspaper headings at the time actually said, Mafia flu jab conspiracy. Now people were dropping dead in the buildings where they received their shots. Many others became paralysed. And the whole program ground to a halt. Now the important thing, really, is that I was the only physician anywhere in the world who warned about these side effects. And this is very important because I'm just an ordinary medical practitioner without specialist qualifications. I wasn't even an American. And yet, I was the only one. Everybody else spoke out in favour of this campaign. And it's very, very obvious that everybody else was wrong and only one was right. The whole program ground to a halt. There wasn't even a single case of swine flu. There was never an epidemic of swine flu, and why it was that the world's most powerful man, with the world's most powerful Department of Health, got it so wrong, we will never know. But it's important to realise that he did get it wrong, and that the authorities did get it wrong.
With forces like this to contend with, humble parent Greg Beattie took on his local council in an anti-discrimination case when his unvaccinated children were refused entry to a council childcare centre. He and Dr. Scheibner, as expert witness, brought in mountains of evidence from orthodox medical literature of the ineffectiveness and harmfulness of vaccines. So what happened?
I was up against the Maroochy Shire Council. They had a policy of excluding unvaccinated children from their childcare centres. Now, as you probably know, there are no laws in Australia saying that you have to have your children vaccinated. You're free to choose whether or not you want to vaccinate them. And there are no penalties for those who don't vaccinate their children, although at the moment it would appear to some people there are penalties. The fact is, if you're a conscientious objector, you can get around those penalties. The Commissioner in his judgment, which was a 19-page document, addressed our evidence in one sentence. He said, it is simply impossible to address the evidentiary material submitted by Dr. Scheibner and Mr. Beattie. On the other hand, the three witnesses for the council, the experts, who were accepted as experts by the Commissioner, didn't submit any evidence apart from their opinion. And they were the ones who were believed.
It is interesting to note the words in court of one of the medical experts when Greg asked him for evidence of a claim he made. He said, "I don't have any figures because it's such a fundamental doctrine of Holy Writ in medicine." Keep that in mind next time you're told anything without a reference to an orthodox medical journal article.
There's a whole lot of fear being used to promote vaccination. I mean, and to me it's just crazy. I mean, we've got a lot of children, and they're very healthy, very strong, robust.
this concept of the unvaccinated child, the child of a parent who chooses not to vaccinate, as somehow a typhoid Mary, is just rubbish. It is plain, straight-out rubbish. Of the children who are said to have died of whooping cough at the moment, it's even hard to find out about that because these are not reported deaths in any way that's possible to assess. But of those children, not one of them has had a proven association with an unvaccinated child.
So much for Greg and his wife's rights. But what are your rights where you live? Fortunately, the situation in Maroochy in Queensland is not at all what is most common in Australia. In New South Wales, the school must ask for an immunisation status certificate, but you don't have to supply one. Even the certificate itself only indicates the immunisation status. The unvaccinated child may still, however, be sent home during an outbreak. Similar laws apply in Victoria and South Australia. Also, regarding overseas travel, many people often believe that certain vaccines are compulsory when in fact they're not. Now, it is most probable that you, or even your children, have already been vaccinated. So what, if anything, can be done afterwards?
Management of situations where there's been vaccine damage really depends very much on what the underlying situation is. If, for example, it's along the lines of a neurological type damage and we're looking at behavioural difficulties and this sort of thing, diet is important in all these situations. Returning diet as closely as possible to the original diet that we were designed to eat is vital. We all need to do this, whether there's vaccine damage or not. For the neurological cases, then certainly you'll be using things like vitamin E, using things like your essential fatty acids. Our brains are 60% docosahexaenoic acid, one of the essential fatty acids, and that needs to be restored. Sometimes choline needs to be restored to help the cells with their myelin formation. Homeopathically, there's a lot of homeopathy that you can use in these cases. If it is a case somewhat like that serum sickness case I was telling you about, with recurrent flu-like symptoms, I'll be using high-dose vitamin C, usually intravenous vitamin C, along with the other sort of nutrients that I was talking about and the dietary changes. Again, homeopathy according to their symptom picture. So certainly you do need to use complementary medicine. Conventional medicine has nothing to offer for these situations.
A new, very sophisticated computer system called the LISTEN system is being increasingly used to help practitioners evaluate and counter the imbalancing effect of vaccines. Pauline Rose uses this system, and she'll use it to test Russell, a complete stranger whom we approached and pulled in off the street at the time of filming.
The LISTEN system is an electrodermal screening device used to measure the resistance in our bodies, the energy resistance. And we know what the normal level of resistance could be, and the deviation from normal gives us information about homeostatic situation of the patient. And we're going to test today to see if there's any changes in nerve function which may have been caused by vaccination. We use the same points that acupuncturists would use. The LISTEN system only gives us data information. It doesn't make a diagnosis. We have to make that on a combination of factors that we've got from the case history and a combination of data that comes from the machine. To find the correct homeopathic, we have to find the homeopathic that returns an out of balance reading back into a balanced reading. And in this case, we've got the DPT vaccination has come up. But I would say generally you probably get a lot of allergies.
Yeah, metal allergies.
Do you get, I get hay fever? Because when we first looked at that, you came up with DPT, and I find a lot of people who have the problems with the pertussis vaccination when they were children, they end up with a lot of respiratory problems, and they get the sinus, the chest problems, the asthma, the gluten.
Yeah, I've got all that.
You got all that?
But I'm a hairdresser and I use airborne polymers with hairspray. So
yeah, well that probably aggravates it now because the environmental allergies that you're exposed to, and they're hitting your weakest spot.
Yeah, ridge tree's bad for me too.
Ridge tree. All those things can actually be desensitised. It takes quite a bit of work to do it, but different types of reactions if the vaccines sometimes throw different types of illnesses in the adult. The younger the patient and the more recent the vaccine, obviously the quicker and slicker the effect, I suppose. With other people you have to look at doing a lot of other things as well, in fact improving their immune system with nutrition and homeopathy, herbs perhaps. And I look forward to, in some of the children, problems with the hyperactivity and the epilepsy. I have one patient, a young man at the moment, autistic, epileptic, and since we've started him on the antidotes and some homeopathic treatment, he has improved dramatically.
So, considering the true effects of vaccination, what is the true key to immunity? Ian Sinclair, a naturopath, now a natural hygienist, who has also thoroughly researched and written a book on vaccination, reveals an interesting fact, potentially quite embarrassing to modern medicine.
The man who was responsible, who was acknowledged as the developer or who originated the germ theory of disease, was Louis Pasteur. Before he died, he changed his mind. He ended up saying that it's not the germ, but the conditions within the body. So there's no argument about there's germs there, you can get sick if you get the germs, but if you develop the sicknesses, it's because, in our opinion, your body is polluted and unhealthy.
It is an issue of maintaining health, and that, I think, is a flaw in medicine. Medicine doesn't see health as protective against disease. This has been used many times, that doctors disparagingly say, oh yeah, there are some parents who think that just having a healthy child's good enough. Well, the truth is it is good enough. In evolutionary history, having healthy children was a good way of making it through the first million years of our evolutionary life. Fiddling around with vaccination is the thing we've done for less than 2 generations. We have no concept of what the consequences of that are.
The editorial to a conference on virus diseases says words to the effect that there is no such thing as a virus or viral disease. There is only a great number of virus-host interactions which we do not understand. So, how do we achieve optimum health?
Well, from my experience and what I've learned over the last 15 years, I think it all starts with 2 healthy parents. I think things like natural childbirth, I think breastfeeding a child is extremely essential. At least in our world, we raise our children on a diet of natural foods, which means basically their diet's fruits and salads and vegetables and small amounts of grains and nuts, probably more towards a vegetarian diet. Plenty of fresh air, plenty of sunshine, exercise, let them have fun, and to me, above all else, you know, children have got to be happy, because if you're not happy, there's no way you can truly have a healthy body. That's why I see it.
We are body, soul and spirit. We consist of these 3 areas, and so we need to deal with each of those areas to have the abundant life we're meant to have. So in the physical, we need to look at having clean air, clean water, whole foods that are preservative-free, chemical-free, unprocessed, not tampered with, food as close to natural as possible. We need to be exercising. Our bodies are designed to be used. We need to be moving around. So these are the sort of physical things that we need to do. Supplements generally are necessary. Sadly, we don't live in the sort of environment that we were first created to live in, and the foods aren't the same that were first available. Most people need supplements to maintain optimum health and optimum life. Our souls need to be taken care of. We need to feed ourselves good thoughts, just the same as we need to feed our bodies good food. Emotional issues need to be dealt with. Forgiveness is a vital issue for health. Their cancers have been linked with people who are holding unforgiveness. It turns into bitterness and it feeds the wrong cells. It destroys the immune system.
Many people wonder if homeopathy is beneficial for the prevention of illness. The truth is that there is a divergence of opinion in this matter. Isaac Golden believes that whilst it's not necessary, it is still beneficial to add it to the agreed important general health measures we just looked at.
The information that I bring when I start talking about my own experience in this field is not something which I invented. It is something which has been used for almost 200 years now, successfully in a documented clinical sense. What we are actually doing is using the law of similars, on which homeopathic medicine of all types is based, to select medicines which can either cause symptoms which are similar to the common symptoms of the disease we're trying to prevent, or medicines which we know can actually treat the common symptoms of the disease we're trying to prevent. So what we show here is that homeopathy is not only effective in the treatment of all types of diseases, it's effective in the treatment of specific infectious diseases, but it is also a genuine option available to people who have made the decision that they don't want to vaccinate their children, but they do want to use a disease-specific method. I'm certainly not calling for everyone to use the homeopathic option, because it is a genuine option to allow your child not to have any specific cover at all, to get the disease and treat.
To end, let's now let a few of our speakers summarise the issue of vaccination.
The litters I've had since I stopped vaccinating my bitches and I've stopped vaccinating the puppies have not had the trouble that I had experienced in previous litters. So many other breeders are experiencing the same change and improvement in their dog's health.
You have to find the information, because these people don't love your children the way you do.
If doctors would only listen to their greatest teacher, Hippocrates, who's the father of medicine, first do no harm. I mean, if they want to administer any form of treatment, first ensure that they're not causing harm. The harm that's caused by vaccines is so well documented that it doesn't even require debate. The paralysis, the brain damage, the death, the many millions of dollars that are paid out in compensation yearly. And those millions of dollars are only the cases that are accepted by a court. And I found out personally what courts accept. They accept very little of what they should, especially when it comes to a conservative issue like this. The word seems to be vaccinate or perish.
From the information based on the study of refereed medical journals written by vaccinators, vaccines do not prevent diseases. Vaccines cause diseases. They make the recipients more susceptible to the disease which the vaccine is supposed to prevent and to a host of unrelated bacterial and viral infections. Vaccines cause allergies, sensitivities to foods and substances and all sorts of things. And the evidence of the causal link between administration of vaccines and observed side effects is irrefutable. Whether it is brain damage or death, it's all well documented.
Yeah, well, we believe health isn't bought in a bottle or a syringe. Health is the direct result of healthful living. And health, natural health, there is no other sort.
I leave it to your judgment what it is that parents should do. But at all times, vaccination, just as any other medical procedure, must remain the choice of parents. Thank you very much. Thank you.
For heaven's sake, it's your children's lives and their future. Not yours, but theirs. Don't let what happened to me and my wife happen to your children.